One of the mysteries of Britain's ancient Stonehenge.
Stonehenge. Stonehenge.
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge. Stonehenge.
Stonehenge.
Stonehenge.
Unknown civilization living right here of Bronze Age people.
A circle of stones on a flat plain in southern England. Tourists photograph it every day. Researchers have studied it for 300 years. And for 300 years, the core question has stayed unanswered. Then someone fed all of it, every survey, every map, every archaeological record, into an AI. What came back was not a new theory. It was a system. And the system is more deliberate, more precise, and more unsettling than anything the standard explanation accounts for. The structure itself. Stonehenge sits on Salisbury Plain, roughly 90 miles southwest of London. The land around it is flat and open in every direction. There is no obvious reason, from the landscape alone, why this particular patch of ground was chosen over any other. That question becomes more pressing the moment you look at what was brought here to build it. The large upright stones, called sarsens, stand more than 20 feet tall. Each one weighs around 25 tons. They did not come from nearby. The closest source of sarsen stone matching their composition is roughly 20 miles away. Moving a single stone of that size over that distance, without wheeled vehicles or draft animals of sufficient scale, is an engineering challenge that modern researchers have attempted to replicate and have not fully solved. The builders moved dozens of them. The smaller stones, called bluestones, tell a more difficult story. They weigh up to 4 tons each, which makes them manageable compared to the sarsens. But they came from the Preseli Hills in Wales. That is approximately 140 miles away. Some researchers believe the source material was even further out than the most commonly cited quarry sites. The bluestones crossed rivers, hills, and open water to reach Salisbury Plain, in numbers large enough to form a significant structural element of the finished monument. Construction began around 3000 BCE and continued in phases for roughly 1,000 years. Multiple generations of builders worked on a project none of them saw completed. That kind of sustained, coordinated effort across centuries requires something that archaeological records are not good at preserving: a shared understanding, passed from one generation to the next, of what was being built and why. What that understanding was is the question Grok was asked to answer, and the answer it produced starts not with the stones, but with the holes. The Aubrey holes. Inside the large earth bank that surrounds Stonehenge is a circle of pits known as the Aubrey holes. These holes were named after John Aubrey, a 17th century scholar who was one of the first people to record them. There are 56 holes in total. Archaeologists believe they were dug before most of the famous stones were put in place, making them one of the oldest parts of the monument. For many years, researchers did not fully understand the purpose of the Aubrey holes. Some believed they may have held wooden posts, stones, or markers. Others thought they might have been unfinished or created without a clear plan. Because their purpose was uncertain, they were often considered a minor feature of Stonehenge. However, a different interpretation has been suggested through a detailed analysis of survey data. When the distances between the Aubrey holes are carefully measured, they do not appear to be perfectly even. Instead, the spacing shows a repeating pattern that resembles a wave. As you move around the circle, the gaps between the holes change in a consistent way. According to this interpretation, the pattern is too regular to be explained by simple mistakes or careless digging. Across all 56 holes, the changes in spacing seem to follow a planned design. This has led some researchers to consider whether the holes had an astronomical purpose. The number 56 is especially interesting because it is close to an important lunar cycle. The Moon's nodal cycle takes about 18.6 years to complete. This cycle describes how the Moon's orbit slowly changes over time. If you multiply 18.6 by 3, the result is about 55.8 years, which is very close to 56. Based on this connection, some researchers have proposed that the Aubrey holes could have been used as a type of lunar calendar or calculator. Markers placed in the holes and moved at regular intervals might have helped people track the moon's movements over long periods. This system may even have helped predict events such as eclipses, which are linked to the moon's orbital cycle. If ancient people could predict eclipses and understand lunar patterns, it would have been very valuable. It could help with planning seasonal activities, agriculture, travel, and other important tasks. Although this idea is still debated, it offers a new way of looking at the Aubrey holes. Instead of seeing them as simple pits with no clear purpose, they may represent a sophisticated attempt to observe and record the movements of the sky. If this interpretation is correct, the builders of Stonehenge possessed a much deeper understanding of astronomy than many people once believed. Acoustic properties. Stonehenge is one of the most famous ancient monuments in the world. It is made up of large stone circles arranged in a special pattern. For many years, researchers studied Stonehenge mainly as a visual structure. However, recent studies suggest that it may also have been designed to affect sound. The arrangement of the stones creates a unique acoustic environment. Sound behaves differently inside the stone circle than it does outside. This is because of the specific design of the monument. The height of the stones, the horizontal lintels placed on top, and the space between different stone groups all help shape how sound moves through the area. When Stonehenge was complete, sounds entering the circle would bounce off the stones and reflect around the space. Some sound frequencies would become stronger, while others would become weaker. Because of this, the inside of Stonehenge may have worked like a large acoustic chamber. It was not only something people could see, but also something they could hear and feel. Researchers have suggested that certain low-frequency sounds may have been especially important. These sounds fall between about 95 and 120 Hz, which is near the lower limit of human hearing. Such sounds are often felt as vibrations in the body, rather than heard clearly with the ears. Modern studies show that low-frequency sound can influence how people feel. Long exposure may affect heart rate and create feelings of awe, mystery, or uneasiness. In some situations, it can also change a person's sense of time and space. Strong, low-frequency vibrations may even cause mild disorientation or unusual sensory experiences. During ancient ceremonies, people may have produced these sounds through drumming, chanting, or other musical activities. The structure of Stonehenge could have amplified or concentrated the vibrations at certain locations inside the circle. People standing in those spots might have felt powerful sensations without understanding exactly where they came from. This suggests that the experience created by Stonehenge was not accidental. The monument may have been carefully designed to influence both sight and sound. If this idea is correct, the builders used architecture to create a special atmosphere for rituals and ceremonies. Stonehenge was not only a monument of stone, but also a place designed to shape human experience. Human, remains, and ritual. Archaeologists have discovered the cremated remains of hundreds of people at Stonehenge. These burials were placed there over a period of more than 500 years. This makes Stonehenge one of the longest-used burial and cremation sites in prehistoric Britain. The large number of remains shows that the site was important to many generations of people. The cremated remains are not spread evenly across the area. Instead, they are found in specific groups or clusters. This pattern has led researchers to wonder why certain locations were chosen for burial, while others were not. Some studies have compared the burial locations with research on Stonehenge's acoustic properties. Acoustic studies suggest that certain areas inside the stone circle may have strengthened low-frequency sounds. These sounds could have been produced by activities such as drumming, chanting, or ceremonial gatherings. According to this interpretation, many of the cremated remains were buried in places where these sound effects may have been strongest. This connection has raised an interesting question. Was the pattern simply a coincidence, or was it intentional? One possibility is that the burials and the acoustic features of Stonehenge were unrelated. People may have chosen burial spots for reasons that had nothing to do with sound. Religious traditions, family connections, or social customs may have been the main factors. Another possibility is that the sound effects were an important part of the site's purpose. In this view, Stonehenge may have been designed to create a special experience during ceremonies connected with death and remembrance. The sounds, the towering stones, and the presence of buried ancestors could all have worked together to create a powerful atmosphere. If this idea is correct, Stonehenge was more than just a monument or a cemetery. It may have been a place where architecture, sound, and ritual were carefully combined. People taking part in ceremonies could have experienced feelings of awe, reflection, or connection with the dead. Today, it is impossible to know exactly what the builders intended. However, the relationship between the burial locations and the acoustic features continues to interest researchers. Whether the connection was deliberate or accidental, both the cremated remains and the sound effects are found in the same areas of the site. This suggests that they may have played an important role in how Stonehenge was used and understood by the people who built it. The bluestones' special properties. The bluestones came from farther away than the sarsens. They were harder to transport. They required more coordination and more sustained effort per stone to move across the landscape. The standard explanation for why the builders chose these particular stones from these particular hills in Wales is that the Preseli Hills were a sacred site, that the stones carried religious significance from their place of origin. That explanation is probably true. It is also incomplete. The bluestones have a physical property that the sarsen stones do not. When struck, they ring. The specific geology of the Preseli Hills produces stone with a tonal quality, a clear, sustained resonance when hit that sounds more like a bell than like rock. Researchers studying the acoustic properties of the individual bluestones have found that different stones produce different tones, and that the range of tones across the full set corresponds to something like a musical scale. What that means for Stonehenge's function depends on how the bluestones were arranged and used. If they were placed in an arrangement that reflected their tonal properties, the full structure would have had a harmonic dimension, different stones contributing different frequencies to the overall acoustic environment of the circle. A ceremony that involved striking the bluestones while occupying the resonant interior of the sarsen ring would have combined architecture, acoustics, and music into a single coordinated event. The builders did not just select stones from Wales because Wales was sacred. They selected these specific stones from this specific location because of what they sounded like. The 140-mile transport was not devotion to a convenient source material. It was the cost of acquiring the right instruments. The larger landscape. Stonehenge does not stand alone. The monument that tourists photograph is the most visible element of a system that extends across kilometers of Salisbury Plain, and that system, when viewed with the tools that were not available to early researchers, reveals a level of planning that changes the scale of what was being built here. LiDAR surveys, technology that uses laser pulses to map terrain beneath vegetation and surface features, have identified dozens of previously unknown structures in the landscape surrounding Stonehenge. Burial mounds, earthwork circles, processional routes, timber circles that left only buried post holes. They are not scattered randomly across the plain. They are arranged in relation to each other and to Stonehenge, with a geometric precision that is visible clearly only from above. The full picture looks like a blueprint. Circles and lines and pathways organized around Stonehenge as a central point, extending outward with deliberate spacing. The angles between major structures, the distances from the center, the orientation of processional routes relative to sunrise and sunset points at solstices and equinoxes. These relationships are too consistent to be the product of independent decisions made by separate groups over separate centuries. UNESCO recognized this when it designated Stonehenge as part of a prehistoric landscape rather than as an isolated monument. The international designation acknowledges what the LiDAR data makes undeniable. The circle of stones is the most visible part of something much larger, and the something much larger was designed as a whole. The question that follows from this is about the design itself. A system of this scale, oriented with this precision, requires a plan. And the plan, as the archaeological record reveals, came before most of the construction. Blueprint first, stones later. The earthworks surrounding Stonehenge are older than the Sarsen stones. The outer circular bank, the Aubrey holes, the avenue that leads northeast from the monument toward the river Avon, these elements predate the Great Stone Circle by centuries in several cases. The ground was shaped first. The stones came later, into a landscape that had already been organized to receive them. That sequence matters because it establishes that whoever planned Stonehenge was not building incrementally toward a structure they were inventing as they went. They were executing a design that already existed in complete or near-complete form before the most challenging construction work began. The Sarsen stones, which required the most labor to acquire, transport, and raise, were the final expression of a plan whose foundations had been laid generations earlier. Preserving a plan across 500 to 1,000 years, the gap between the earliest earthworks and the completion of the Sarsen ring, without writing, without technical drawings, without institutional infrastructure of the kind that modern engineering projects rely on, requires something that archaeology is not well equipped to study. Oral tradition is the standard answer. Specialist knowledge held by ritual practitioners and passed from teacher to student across generations is another. Both are plausible. Neither fully explains how the alignment precision of the finished monument matches what the original earthwork layout implied. Something preserved the design across that span of time with enough fidelity to produce a finished structure that fits the original plan. What that something was is one of the questions Grok flagged as unresolved, and the answer, whatever it is, describes a capacity for long-term knowledge transmission that the standard picture of prehistoric Britain does not easily accommodate. Declining precision over time. Grok's analysis of the construction data produced one finding that no previous synthesis had made this clearly. Stonehenge got less precise as it went on. The earliest phases of construction show deviations in stone placement of approximately 3.2 centimeters from the ideal geometric positions. For a monument built with the tools available in 3000 BCE, that figure is extraordinary. It reflects a level of care and measurement skill that matches or exceeds what later, better documented ancient cultures achieved in their most precise architectural projects. The later phases tell a different story. By the time the final configurations were being assembled, deviations had increased to approximately 12.7 centimeters. The stones were still being placed with considerable care. But the precision of the earliest builders was gone. Tool marks on the stones themselves add another layer to this picture. Researchers examining the surfaces of the Sarsens have found evidence of two different kinds of working. Earlier tool marks show techniques consistent with builders who understood the properties of the stone and were shaping it deliberately for fit and function. Later tool marks suggest a different approach, one that researchers have described as imitation without full understanding. The later builders were reproducing the appearance of what the earlier builders had done without fully grasping why the earlier builders had done it that way. This is a specific kind of decline. It is not the decline of a society losing resources or facing external pressure. It is the decline of transmitted knowledge, the gradual erosion of understanding across generations of people who are trying to continue a project whose original reasoning is becoming less clear to them. The plan survived. The understanding of the plan did not survive at the same rate. Stonehenge, read this way, is not the triumphant achievement of a growing civilization. It is the fading output of one that was losing something it had once possessed and building faster, in its later phases, to try to preserve what it could before the understanding was gone entirely. Abandonment. Around 1600 BCE, activity at Stonehenge changes. The construction record stops. Ceremonies, if they continued, left fewer physical traces, and some of the stones were deliberately laid down. Others were covered. The site was not abandoned in the way that settlements are abandoned when people leave or resources run out. The physical evidence suggests something more deliberate. Laying a standing stone down and covering it is not neglect. It takes effort. It is a choice made by people who are doing something to the monument rather than simply leaving it. Researchers have proposed various explanations: ritual closure, changing religious practice, response to some cultural shift. All of these are plausible. None of them accounts fully for the pattern. The interpretation that fits most consistently with everything else Grok's analysis produced is this: the people who laid the stones down knew the knowledge that built them was running out. They had watched the precision decline across generations. They had produced later phases of construction that reproduced the form of earlier work without fully reproducing its understanding. And at some point, they made a decision. They put the stones in the ground, not to bury them forever, to preserve them. Stone in the ground is protected from weathering, from damage, from the surface processes that erode exposed rock over centuries and millennia. Laying a stone down and covering it is how you keep it in the best possible condition for the longest possible time, for people who might come later and understand what it was for. Stonehenge's abandonment under this reading was not a failure. It was the last act of a civilization trying to hand something forward to a future it could not see. The system. Grok's full output, across all the data it processed, describes Stonehenge as an integrated system. Each element connects to the others in ways that only become visible when you stop looking at them separately. The Aubrey holes track the lunar nodal cycle. The nodal cycle governs eclipses and tidal patterns, the two most visually dramatic and practically significant ways the moon affects life on Earth. A society that could predict eclipses had a form of knowledge that carried enormous social and practical weight. The people who held that knowledge held something real. The acoustic design of the Sarsen ring concentrated infrasound at specific interior points. Ceremonies conducted in that acoustic environment, involving sustained low-frequency sound, would have produced physical and psychological effects in the participants that had no visible cause, effects that the architecture itself was generating. The design of the monument was inseparable from the experience it was built to create. The bluestones contributed their own tonal properties to that acoustic environment, extending the harmonic range of the interior and adding a musical layer to ceremonies that already had an architectural acoustic dimension. The selection of specific stones from a specific distant source was not incidental to this function. It was essential to it. The broader landscape, the burial mounds, the processional routes, the earthwork circles visible only from above, organized the surrounding plain into a framework that oriented the full landscape around Stonehenge as its center. The monument was not placed in the landscape. The landscape was built around the monument. And the timeline of the monument's construction, from the precision of its early phases to the decline of its later ones, to the deliberate preservation of its final act, describes not a project that grew, but a project that was always complete in concept and slowly became incomplete in understanding. These are not separate observations about a circle of stones. They are elements of a single system that was designed to do specific things: track time, produce experience, preserve knowledge, orient a landscape, and that was built and maintained and ultimately handed forward by people who understood, at least partially, what they were responsible for carrying, what they were trying to preserve. The question that Grok's analysis ultimately produces is not the question most people bring to Stonehenge. Most people want to know who built it. The answer to that question, Neolithic and Bronze Age communities in southern Britain across roughly 1,000 years of construction, is not in serious dispute. The question Grok's analysis forces is different. Not who built it, but what were they trying to preserve? The lunar calculator encoded in the Aubrey holes preserves the capacity to predict the sky's most significant events without instruments, without writing, without institutions, using 56 holes in the ground and a marker moved at known intervals. That is compressed knowledge. It is the reduction of a complex astronomical understanding into a physical form that can be taught, demonstrated, and used by people who do not fully understand the mathematics behind it. The acoustic design preserves the capacity to produce a specific kind of experience in a specific kind of moment, the kind of experience that, for the societies that built Stonehenge, was inseparable from the transmission of knowledge itself. The ceremonies conducted inside that resonant space were not separate from the education of the people who attended them. The experience was the transmission. The broader landscape preserves orientation, a physical record of how this culture understood its position in space and time, encoded in earthworks and sight lines and processional routes that persist long after the knowledge that designed them has faded. And the declining precision, the imitation tool marks, the deliberate laying down of stones at the end, these preserve the evidence of what happened to that knowledge over time. Not just that it was lost, but how it was lost. Slowly, across generations, with people working hard to maintain what they were receiving less and less ability to understand. Stonehenge is not a monument to a civilization at its height. It is a monument to a civilization at the edge of losing something it understood well enough to know it was losing, and to spend generations trying to fix into stone before it was gone. Why Grok saw this, and academia didn't. 300 years of research produced the individual observations that Grok synthesized. The lunar connection to the Aubrey holes had been proposed before. The acoustic properties of the Sarsen ring had been measured. The tonal quality of the bluestones had been documented. The LiDAR landscape surveys had been published. The precision decline in later construction phases was present in the survey data. None of these observations, held separately within individual research programs, produce the picture that emerges when they are held together. Academic research is structured around specialization. The archaeologist studying cremated remains is not the same researcher modeling the acoustic properties of the stone arrangement. The geophysicist mapping the electromagnetic signature of the wider landscape is not the same person analyzing the tonal frequency of individual bluestones. The data existed in separate places, interpreted within separate frameworks, by people with no professional mechanism for synthesizing across all of them simultaneously. Grok has no specialization. It processes all the data together, looks for patterns across the full dataset, and reports what the patterns describe. It does not have a career investment in the lunar calculator theory, or the acoustic experience machine theory, or any other individual reading. It has no reason to protect one explanation at the expense of another. It finds what the data shows and produces an output that holds all of it at once. What the data shows, held all at once, is a system, not a monument with multiple interesting features. A system with integrated elements that were designed to work together, built by people who understood the integration and maintained by people who understood it progressively less well until they made the decision to put what they could not fully understand anymore into the ground and leave it for later. The synthesis was always available. The tool to produce it arrived 300 years after the research began. The fading memory. There is a specific kind of loss that Stonehenge describes. It is not the loss that comes from catastrophe, from war or famine or sudden collapse. The archaeological record around Stonehenge does not show those things in the period of the monument's decline. What it shows is something slower and in some ways harder to account for. The people who built the later phases of Stonehenge were not less capable than the people who built the earlier phases. They were skilled. They moved enormous stones. They maintained a project across generations. They reproduced, with considerable care, the form of what their predecessors had made. But the precision declined. The tool marks changed character. The understanding behind the form was thinning out, even as the effort to maintain the form continued. This is what it looks like when knowledge that was always transmitted, person to person, ceremony to ceremony, specialist to specialist, begins to lose the chain. Each generation receives a little less than the previous one gave. Each generation reproduces what it received as faithfully as it can. And the reproduction is good enough that it looks right, good enough to continue the project, but it is not quite the same as what was passed to it, not quite as precise, not quite as fully understood. The later builders of Stonehenge were working from a memory of a memory of a memory. The original knowledge, whatever it was, wherever it came from, whoever first understood that this specific landscape needed to be organized this specific way, with this specific acoustic geometry oriented to this specific lunar cycle, was becoming, by the end, something they could see the shape of, but not fully hold. The stones they laid down at the end were not a burial. They were a note to the future. We could not hold this any longer. Here it is. If you can read it, read it. After centuries of study, Stonehenge may be seen as more than a monument. It could be a carefully designed record, created to preserve important knowledge and beliefs for future generations. If that question keeps you here, subscribe. The record goes further than this, and we are only getting started.